To add color to our Flint corn project, we will be using watercolor paint. You guys have full choice on how you want to paint your work. You can look at the pictures in Seesaw and figure out a color palette. I would recommend sticking with probably warm colors, so reds, yellows, and oranges, or cool colors, blue, greens, and purples, or maybe even a rainbow. But every single color palette, no matter what you choose, we're going to add some browns in to make it look a little bit more realistic. Remember that while Flint corn can be a lot of colors, we do want to keep it looking real or realistic. To start with watercolor, you're going to take your brush nice and wet a few kernels. You'll create a small puddle on top of a few kernels at a time. Then you'll make a puddle on whatever the color is that you're using in your palette. And if it's wet enough, we will dip our brush in there and tap it on the puddle on our paper, and it will start to spread around. The trick with watercolor is that we are not going to paint the whole paper at a time. We're going to just be doing sections so that it stays nice and wet, and we have to make sure we're using a light hand. That means we're not pushing our paintbrush down and digging into our paints, and we're also not pushing our paintbrush down and digging into our paper. Even though we need a nice wet surface for this, we're not using real watercolor paper. And if your paper gets too wet or you push down too hard, it will rip right through. So we need to have gentle hands while we work. We don't want our colors to be too bright. So if you lay your color down and it's super, super bright, you can add some water on top to make it a little bit lighter. What's really cool about watercolors is that they layer really well, so you can sit different colors on top of each other. You see here that I started with blue, and I'm adding purple in some sections. To make it look a little bit more realistic or natural, I will add some browns in areas to kind of dull that color down a little bit. Because even though there's some blues or some purples or some reds within our real Flint corn, they're not super bright like they would be on jewelry or on a poster. So we want these to look like natural colors and not super, super bright gemstones. As your painting starts to dry, you may have some spaces where you want to go back in and add some more colors. While we're working, we're doing just a few kernels at a time, but if you want to add pops of color within your work, you can just do 1 or 2 kernels. Remember that we're also going to be going back when this is completely dry and adding more detail with our pencil or our Sharpie. So if there's space where you want to shade in a kernel, you can do that with your paint, or we can wait till later and do it with your pencil or your Sharpie for your finishing touches. Once your corn's complete, we'll be painting the husks. I gently lifted my paper so you could see it better in the camera, and if you need to move your paper, we need to very carefully move it, because since it's super, super wet, it will rip very easily. Remember to make a puddle on whatever color you're using, and if you want more vibrant colors, you will use more paint and less water, and if you want more of a duller color, you'll use more water and less paint. Remember that we want to layer, 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 so you'll have a little bit of yellow, a little bit of brown, and you can keep going back in and adding on top of your previous color until your work looks like it's finished. I'd like to just show you one more example of how to paint your corn before you get to work. The first example was made with crayon, and this is one of my drawings that I made with thin Sharpie. And since you have 2 options when drawing, I would like to show you your options when you go to paint. Remember, I said you can choose any color palette that you would like to, but whatever you choose, I want you to stick with it from the beginning all the way through the end. On my first example, I did cool colors, so I used blues, greens, and purples. For these examples, I'm going to do one that's yellows and a little bit more of a natural corn, and I'm going to do one that's more reds. And remember that those are real Flint corn colors, so you can check out examples of actual Flint corn in our Seesaw activity before beginning or while you're working if you'd like. keep in mind during this project that watercolor sort of does what it wants to. So it might go out of the lines, your colors might get a little bit muddy. We want to be flexible with this project and just remember to take our time and that we can always layer and add on to our work later. When you're completely finished, you have two choices for your background. You can either leave your background white, the way that I did on one of my examples, or you can choose a neutral color for your background. I'm going to do this one with black, and remember you start with a puddle, a little bit of paint on top of your color, and start to spread it around. Whatever you choose, if you decide to paint your background, we want it nice and light. We don't want it to be super dark, so just a little bit of paint on that puddle and fill it up. So you could do black or you could do brown, just a nice light wash on our work as we're finishing up. If you don't want to do a background, that's okay. You can just leave it white the way that I did with my double corn, whatever you are comfortable with or whatever makes you feel like your work looks the most finished.